Douglas County Board of County Commissioners business meeting. We want to welcome those of you who are with us at the Douglas County Courthouse, as well as those of you joining us online. I just want to pass on a bit of information regarding how we'll run our hybrid meetings in person and on Zoom during this time of social distancing. Each action item will have an opportunity for public comment. If you want to make a comment on that item, we ask that you wait until that item is on the agenda. The public comment portion of our agenda is for items not on the agenda, but related to general county business. All public comments should be directed towards the County Commission. For both opportunities, we will take public comment from citizens who are in person at the courthouse first, then online commenters. All public commenters will be limited to 3 minutes. If you have public comment on an agenda item or under regular public comment, please use the raise your hand function on Zoom. Staff will call on you and unmute you. We ask that speakers give their name and address for the minutes. The county reserves the right to shut off the microphone and remove any speaker from the meeting if they are vulgar, rude, or inappropriate. If visual aids are used during the meeting, the presenter will share the screen with the call. Participants will not be able to view them without a computer, smartphone, or tablet. All participants will be entered into the meeting with their audio muted, meaning the commission, the public will not be able to hear you. Presenters will be unmuted when their agenda item comes up. We ask that all online presenters use good conference call etiquette and mute their line when not speaking and introduce themselves each time they speak. The chat function has been disabled. A recording of this meeting will be available on our website after the meeting. We will begin with our consent agenda. Would either commissioner like to pull anything from the consent agenda? Do we have a move to?
Do we need to ask for if anybody?
Thank you. Do we have anyone online that would like to pull anything from the consent agenda?
It's Commissioner Reed, I move to approve today's consent agenda.
All of those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
So forgot to wait for a second on that. So
Yeah, so let's back up. I'll go ahead and provide the second on it, but I also wanted to say a huge thank you to our emergency management team. That was a ton of work to put that together, working all across the community. So I just was going to add that. So thank you.
we will go ahead and take that vote again since we have a second. So all of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And we will move on to general public comment. It does not look like we have anyone here for general public comment in the courthouse. Do we have anyone online for general public comment? Okay. We will move on to our regular agenda, starting with item 3.1, Douglas County Courthouse Foundation Waterproofing and Repair Project. Sarah?
Thank you, Commissioners. Jay Zimmershed, our Director of Capital Projects, is here. He will walk us through the request to issue this RFP. Just you have to push the button there and it goes green. There you go.
Does this help? Okay. Sorry, Robin. So anyway, a preservation plan is typically accomplished in many phases. Many times they're too large to accomplish all at one time. And so this is what we are proposing as the next phase of work covered by that preservation plan. In going through and looking at all the components and pieces covered in the plan, we began to prioritize pieces and try and figure out what was the next best step to take. And this project is kind of the culmination of that staff review and effort. There are really three reasons why I think this project kind of jumped to the front of the list for completion. One is obviously a building's foundation is critical to its survival, and the building sits on it. And so making sure that those are well maintained and protected and taken care of is appropriate. Two is improving staff conditions in the lower level to make sure that we're stopping some of the water that's coming in. And then fourth, in looking at future projects coming, in preparation for a master plan that involves work down in those spaces that's unrelated to necessarily the preservation side of things. It doesn't make sense to really implement any of that kind of work if we don't have some of the problematic conditions corrected. I think it is important to realize that back in 1904, I think when the building was constructed, they didn't do waterproofing on these type of structures. They built them with limestone and mortar and built the walls up. And then on the inside, which if you're ever down in the basement, you'll see there's a lot of paneling and things that have been added over time. But on the inside of the wall, they basically parge that with basically a plaster mix, and that is it for waterproofing. And so these buildings traditionally are incredibly porous, and that's what we're trying to stop. The project basically would consist of excavation around the entire perimeter of the building, laying that soil back probably in the neighborhood of 10-ish feet so that we could get down to the actual lowest level of the foundation, testing and making sure that the stones that are below grade that you don't see are in good condition and holding up a lot of the stone that's above it, repairing any of those stones that need it, then going back and providing waterproofing drain tile around the bottom of the footer and connecting that into a sump pump so that water can be collected. Water will find the least path of travel. And so creating that is really what we're doing. We're giving it a venue to get out and away from the building instead of being driven through the walls, cracks in the walls, those kind of things. It's easy to think about it that way, but when you think about going around the perimeter of the building, we need to be under the north stairs right up against the building. We need to be right up against the west side of the building underneath those stairs on the mechanical pad. And there's actually a historic stair that goes down into the mechanical room that we will need to be up and underneath. So these pieces kind of come in to the project. It's easy to say we're just waterproofing and doing some foundation work, but the truth is it has multiple other components to it. When we're done, there's the potential for re-landscaping, which may be dovetailed into some future phases, which we're hoping we might be able to bring before this board for consideration fairly quickly. So anyway, that in a nutshell is really what the project is. The AIR or agenda item before you is requesting that staff be provided authority to go out and look for design professionals to begin consultation on this work, because there's a lot of nuances to costs associated with it, how it might dovetail into future phases, integration of various systems, and even systems off-site that might be contributing to water coming to our site and to the building. So there's this kind of holistic view that needs to be happening, and we think it would be best to bring on a design professional that has expertise in this area. We do believe we have an we have an estimate for the project that was updated in 2018. In looking at some of those numbers, again, another reason to bring on a design professional who has experience in this today. 2017, 2018 dollars look very different from 2021 dollars. Supply chain, COVID, labor shortages, you name it. And so refreshing that would really be the first part of what this group would do. And then, so it's formally defining the scope of the foundational waterproofing, and then hopefully moving forward. But in any event, we would be back before this group with that, with that design proposal, and then obviously subsequent design or construction proposals. So we do believe we have dollars ready and dedicated to do this project. Although the estimates that we have, we feel might be a little low for today dollars, we still think they fit well within what we have available for the overall building. It is our hope that we might be able to jump into the next phase and start doing some above grade masonry restoration work pretty much immediately following. But again, it makes sense to get the excavation and the dirt put back because they're going to need scaffolding to get up alongside the building for those future phases. So another reason this kind of became priority. That's really all the presentation I have. We have started on an RFP if this is the direction that is chosen to move forward. So I think we could move fairly quickly with issuing an RFP, RFQ for professional services associated with these specific pieces of the project. I think that's all I have, and I would stand for questions.
Do we have any questions from commissioners?
Thanks for that. This is Commissioner Reed. I was just curious, or I guess it's more of a comment, that in that new estimation and design, we consider the impact on the one accessible entrance to the building, which is that ramp. So I would imagine that might be disrupted as part of at some phase of the work. So just wanting to consider a workaround for that.
The answer is yes. And honestly, every single entry to the building will be interrupted at some point because the west stair and the north stair will literally be deconstructed. The west stair, it has gone through rehabilitation and restoration work previously. So it will be take it apart and put it back. The north stair is in pretty significant decay. And although I'm sure we will maintain as much historic integrity of the material that we can, if stones are beyond repair, they typically will call for replacement but following the guidelines of the Secretary of the Interior standards for work on historic structures. So we may have new pieces going on over there, but every single entrance into the building will be affected by this. And that's another reason we're interested in getting a design professional on, so that that idea of phasing and how maybe we are maintaining entrances for the public and those kind of things open, because we won't be able to take them all down at once. We'll be required to maintain at least two. And so that will be another piece of it. It is my understanding that when the ADA ramp was put into the lower level, that there was waterproofing applied because we had the dirt removed in order to do it just on that face of the building. And review and study of that wall and those finishes that are there would suggest that we're not getting the water infiltration that we're getting in other places in the basement. And so that was a long answer, but yes.
We will open this up for public comment. Sarah, Jill, do we have anyone online for public comment?
We do not.
We will bring it back for discussion amongst commissioners. Any discussion?
No discussion, Jay. Thanks for the report. Appreciate that. Happen to make a motion if commissioners are ready. Move to authorize staff to begin procurement of professional design service for the Douglas County Courthouse Foundation waterproofing and repair project.
Second.
All of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We will move on to item 3.2, a legislative update with Little Government Relations. Sarah.
Commissioners, Stuart Little with Little Government Relations is going to be here to give us an overview. He is running a little late, so I might suggest that we change the order of our agenda and do the executive session and then come back and do our legislative update.
Sounds good. So how long would we like to go into executive session?
15 minutes is
Okay.
plenty.
So at 5:45, the board will recess to executive session for 15 minutes for the purpose of consultation with legal counsel for the county regarding pending litigation, which would be deemed privilege under the attorney-client relationship, and return at 6 p.m. Attendees include Commissioners Portillo, Reed, and Kelly, Fred Finkeldye, Assistant County Counselor, and Sarah Plinsky, County Administrator. I believe we need a motion and a vote.
Motion then adjourn into executive session, or not adjourn, go into executive session.
Second.
All of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
6 o'clock. So we are back from our executive session and we will resume with our regular agenda with item 3.2, a legislative update with Little Government Relations.
that work? Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. I apologize for, I'm glad you had some other work to take care of. So I was not taking it easy. I was in the Corrections and Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee in Topeka. They were making recommendations and they took longer than I thought. So I apologize for being late. You have a written report for me of a legislative update, and I'll briefly hit a couple of highlights from that. And then one of the other items that's on the list is the platform, and this may be kind of the first conversation or look at the legislative platform. The legislative update, I'll hit a couple of highlights and be happy to answer any questions. There are a couple of issues just yesterday from my written report, the modifications to the Emergency Management Act, Senate Bill 40. The hearing in the state Supreme Court was yesterday on that decision made from a district court judge to declare it unconstitutional. It's the impact, however that issue may go, and I know you all have seen the press accounts of kind of the issues in terms of constitutionality, had the trigger expired for someone to make a claim and those kind of things. That's followed through the Shawnee Mission School District, and obviously there's one that's connected to the county as well. At this point, the whatever the court's decision is going to be when it comes out, whatever happens and how it's dealt with is going to have an impact when we get into the next legislative session in terms of how are we going to further modify. And I mean, because there's certainly going to have to be some changes given some of the components of the law that were put in there. Some of the things that were kind of, I don't know, precedent breaking is the right thing, but kind of very different, where if you didn't get a decision within 7 days, you were automatically declared, you had a decision in your favor, and those kinds of issues. I think that would be something that would probably not be included in the next piece of legislation that passes. But I think it's very likely that no matter what happens here, we're going to come back and be looking at the Emergency Management Act again, because this is kind of the third variation of that we've had in the last year. And so that's going to be in the works, and that'll be one of those issues, one of the things that was kind of one of the most significant changes, I think, from most local government perspective, whereas when they made the main transition, was that the public health officer's authority was taken away to make those public health decisions. That, of course, is now a decision that you all as the commission makes. And I don't know that that's going to necessarily change, but it'll be interesting to see where we are in the pandemic, the experience we've had with some of these issues, what might come forth. So obviously that's pretty high on the list. I would note that state revenues are high. We've got over a $2 billion cash balance at the end of the last fiscal year, and revenues continue to exceed expectations and the estimates that were made. And we'll get new revenue estimates in November, but there are some of the things that we're interested in that cost money, and for local governments, and that does a couple of things. Some of the things that spending becomes kind of an option here, but as well, the conversation about tax changes, tax reform, some of the property tax issues that I have in my report that may be coming up could have an impact on how that might transpire during next legislative session. There are a couple of issues of a couple of interim committees that came up very late. And one of them has to do with a special committee on education. And I just noted it in there because it's kind of going to be a fairly significant topic. The other one was the creation of the committee that was, it's called the Committee on Government Overreach and Impact of COVID-19 Mandates. This was created by legislative leadership after the executive orders, the federal employee decision from the president, the OSHA requirements for employers of over 100 employees, and then any entity that was a provider that received Medicaid or Medicare reimbursement. Of course, there are some entities that have that would be required to have the vaccine. The committee has 5 days scheduled for hearings on that topic. So, we're 71 or 2 days from the beginning of the legislative session. So the first meeting is Friday and Saturday of this week, and they're having a extremely rare Saturday hearing where they'll have public comment and public testimony. Friday will be invited guests. I haven't seen the final agenda. And then Saturday will be open for folks that want to come in and testify. So it ought to be interesting, to say the least. But I think what's going to come out of that, I think a lot of that is going to be gathering information. Clearly, there are issues of states' rights and federal supremacy. Those were settled centuries ago, but there will be some conversation probably taken out of here about what might the legislature be able to do to mitigate some of the federal policy changes, the executive orders and so forth. So that's obviously another thing that we'll be paying attention to, and to the extent to which it ties your hands or the services that we provide, we'll be making sure that we'll try to sort through what may be said on Thursday and Friday, because we're going to come back for 3 more days or on Friday and Saturday, we'll be coming back for more hearings. To kind of shift a little bit to kind of lead to the point of having a bit of some point about the legislative platform. On the local government side, a couple of things that we're still watching are the part of it has to do with commercial valuation of property. There have been several decisions now in Douglas County or in Johnson County related to the valuation of commercial property and how the property is valued. And obviously, I think this has been lingering here under the surface for a while. We now have court decisions coming up. So the question may arise in terms of the legislature, what may they choose to do in that process? And at some level, the natural process of court decisions and BODA are affirming the kind of the recalculation of this and of commercial value, and that may be a natural process that we're headed down. Or there may be folks that be interested in intervening into the process and saying, we need to affirmatively make some changes to the commercial valuation process. Your appraiser can inform you many more times over about the specificity of those kind of changes, but it's one of those issues like, are we going to naturally kind of evolve there? And if somebody steps in to start to say, let's change a bit the process, that's where it's going to get more tricky. But that's something that's looming on the horizon. The other thing that's related to, and of course, all of this has an impact on the county's assessed valuation and revenue, and impacts the budget and operations and those kind of things. Similarly, an issue that we had that came up last year that's worth noting, it's going to come back, was the issue that had been kicking around for a couple of years, and it began with for-profit health clubs. And there were several pieces of legislation last year that started to make their way through the process, and they didn't kind of get over the finish line at the end of the session. But there, the sense that there are governmental services for which there is a private sector alternative, and do those private sector entities face unfair competition and therefore don't deserve to have the recourse they are seeking is not paying property taxes on those entities. So that is not going away because the legislature was not able to finish that process. There's a legislative post-audit that's going on right now. They're reaching out to folks around the state and doing some surveys and collecting data. There should be a report during the legislative session at some point that will talk about, my understanding of the way they're phrasing it in some interesting ways. At least one of the things that I've seen is in terms of behavioral health services. You have for-profit entities or folks in private practice. I mean, when you think about the range of services that the county government provides, where they're, and I don't like to say people that are in competition, because I think the services provided through a governmental community center are very different than the services in the process in a private entity. So I don't like to say in competition with each other, because they're different entities, but they're looking into things like childcare, into behavioral health services, and kind of that fitness arena, and collecting some data on that. So it has the potential to have obviously a significant impact. The focus got really large at one point when the bill was in committee. It was a fun 3 days where the bill got bigger and bigger. And at one point it was essentially anyone who could claim a competition with a governmental entity would be subject to eligible for not paying property taxes. And so that's sitting there. We're going to have some data through a legislative post-audit, and it will come back up again. The one thing I would note as well, the special joint taxation committee has 2 days for meetings None of them have been scheduled, but I think we'll get kind of a preview of what people are thinking when that comes up later on. It's obviously, we've only got 2 months left now at this point, but likely to see some of that happen. You know, I will move to, for the sake of speed, to kind of the 4th page of my report here and talk about laying the groundwork a bit about some of the issues that we anticipate coming up as 2022 legislative session issues. And I've hit on several of these, but I just want to, there's a couple that are to add and a couple things as you look over the platform and we come back at some point and have that conversation. But the governmental services that are perceived to be similar, there's a bill that came out that almost got out of committee. We're still working on it. It came from Atchison County that would alter or change the distribution formula for county sales tax to local units within the county. And essentially it would give the county the authority to make any decision about what you wanted to do with the sales tax. I mean, just skip the formula that we currently have. The way the bill, after some discussion, took place was the chair of the Senate Tax Committee proposed that instead of that going forward, any new or any renewed sales tax, if a county commission chose to retain all of that revenue at the county level, you would just have to give 60 days notice that was the intent of the county. And so when that came back up, there would be on the ballot as this is kept as all by the county, and you would not use the formula. That bill never got out of committee, but it was part of that whole package of a lot of the tax stuff that was going on. So that's still alive, I suspect. A couple of other things that I would note here is there are still some issues. I think the Clerks Association, Kansas Association of Counties have some issues with the revenue neutral rate calculation that we just did. So we're going to have something about that. I would note that there's some bigger picture public health issues. We've talked about Senate Bill 40. We've talked about kind of the COVID mandate committee. But there are a variety of other issues that we're working on. I think we're going to continue the process of looking at the funding for the crisis center. There are significant funds moving forward through the process in the behavioral health system. So for example, Burt Nash and the Certified Community Behavioral Health Center process, that's underway. And I think Burt Nash is in the 2nd round of community mental health centers that'll be part of that. And there'll be a significant infusion of resources and responsibilities at the same time for them. We also are going to be looking at some sustainable funding, and I know because headquarters is here, sustainable funding for the 988 hotline, suicide hotline. That's still very much up in the air. There was $3 million that was added to do the beginning process and set up, but there needs to be looking for a sustainable revenue stream for that. And thus far, I haven't heard any solution. 2 last things I would mention. In general, I would suspect, given some of the things that are going on in the healthcare community, we are likely to have a pretty vigorous discussion and debate in Topeka about not just COVID vaccines, but vaccines and all vaccines. And from the public health perspective, that we'll probably get a feel of that this weekend in the COVID mandates committee meeting. But there was a bill last year that still remains in this. Everything that was alive last year is still alive for one more cycle. But a bill that moved the public health through KDHE, the designation of vaccinations that are required, is in the secretary manages that. There was a bill last year that would put that into statute, put the vaccine requirements into statute, which of course that means that would be subject to 63 in the House, 21 in the Senate, and the governor that would sign off on it would determine those lists. That bill is sitting in committee. There's probably some enhanced interest in that legislation now as we go back in next legislative session. And so that's something that we're keeping an eye on from a public health perspective. The last thing I would mention is it didn't get a lot of attention because there were a lot of other things happening at the time, but the Kansas House of Representatives very substantially passed a medical marijuana bill last session. It went to the Senate in probably the last 3 or 4 days of the regular of the session, and so it didn't get any treatment. I don't know that it's outside the realm of possibility that the Senate passes something and something like that emerges. So from a variety of perspectives for county government, that's going to be something that's going to have to be dealt with as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's where we're headed, particularly in an election year when every other surrounding state now has it. So that's what I have in my report. I think Joel or Sarah, I don't, the platform that's attached to them, I don't know if that's just last year's or if there's anything different put into it, but I'm happy to answer any questions in particular, but at the very least, if there's anything that.
Yeah, commissioners, the legislative statement attached is just last year's legislative statement, just to refresh your memories. And I think, we will begin working with Stuart to refresh that for this upcoming year. Obviously, that's something that will come to the commission to review before it's finalized. If you have thoughts and comments about things we should look at and change, I know I'd be glad to collect those and work with Stuart to get the document where we want to have it by the end of the year.
And we'll be circulating it with department heads
Yeah,
as well,
agreed.
which is kind of part of our normal process as well. But I think our hope today was with, the background from Stuart, like this would be an opportunity for things that maybe we're not thinking about or that aren't already in here that maybe we want to emphasize. So just to start you thinking about it, maybe have a brief conversation if you have any initial thoughts.
Thank you all. I do have some initial thoughts about that 2022 legislative statement, but we should probably take questions first before we come to discussion. Do we have any questions from commissioners for Stuart?
Stuart, you on your report as you were going down through those 2022 legislative issues, maybe I missed it, but appraisal and valuation process regarding commercial property. I think you're probably talking dark store theory.
Yes.
Did you skip that, or you talked about it earlier and I
Well,
missed it?
when I was talking about the Johnson County
Right.
decision for those and I was referencing that. Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
I just
Yes.
wanted to make sure that that's what you were
There
thinking.
wasn't another issue to be
Okay.
wary of. Yes, that's it. Same thing.
Okay, we will open this for public comment. Do we have anyone online for public comment, Jill? Okay, we'll bring it back for discussion. I did just want to say I really liked our 2021 legislative statement, just as far as updates, the criminal justice reform piece. Now that we do have the supportive bids for an office in Douglas County, just being really explicit about that. I think that we also kind of list out clarifying county authority. I do think that there are quite a few preemption issues that I'm worried about around public health when it comes to how we think about the role of public health, the county and the state. And so I don't know if we want to clarify what we mean by clarifying. And then just I do think Kansas as a state misses out on a lot of federal funding. I mean, pushing back against the HOPE Act would really actually help a lot of folks in our local community. And we address that through CanCare expansion, which I think is one step towards that, but also thinking about other federal programs that we're missing out on because of restrictions at the state level and how that would really benefit our local community.
I appreciate those additions, Commissioner Portillo. Excuse me. I am realizing that I reviewed this at home and left my notes with my computer at home today, so forgive me as I try and recall. I do want us to be explicit in our support of criminal justice reform and I mean, I think that's been a conversation that's been very present in Douglas County. And I'll be honest, Stuart, I'm sorry that it's escaping me, so I'll just leave it at that.
And I think that's fine. We're at the very beginning stages
Yeah.
of this, so we can begin to work on just updating some drafts. But if you think of things, it's still October. We've got plenty of time to begin to put this together where we want it to be. I know department heads will have some thoughts too, and we'll bring it back before the commission. So just whenever you get them, we can begin to work on that draft.
Stuart, we have been seeing, I should have asked this during the question portion, I'm sorry. We have been seeing more and more discussion around redistricting. How do you see that affecting our local community?
There's been another round of public hearings. I don't know if there's going to be one here. I don't know where they announced for the next round of those, but redistricting in the biggest sense is the most political thing that happens in the state legislature. When you think about everything that we're going to have as policy issues and funding issues and issues next legislative session that the legislature is going to deal with, the one thing that is going to be happening that you will never read about in the newspaper, that there will never be a story about, but has the most impact and is the most influential issue among the 165 legislators is redistricting, because it all has to do with where they're going to be, who they may have to run against, how can they do it. So that makes everything interesting just from a public policy perspective when there's a whole third conversation kind of taking place. I mean, there are going to be committee meetings, but maps and proposals and agreements are behind the scenes. So although they wouldn't say that. So the reality is that there are going to be changes made in some districts. There's a lot of conversation going on about making some changes in congressional districts to adjust the distribution of partisanship, because that's what it's about within some of those districts. I think there's what the impact may be here in the county, and that's kind of all the big picture stuff, but here in our county, the extent to which oftentimes delegations are kind of left alone. So if like, this is your space, those folks are allowed to work out kind of adjustments. So if you're in, just pick Northwest Kansas and you've got to make adjustments to deal with that, those folks kind of get together and we'll figure out what they want to do. So there may be some of that as a component. So folks you don't want to do radical revision among the people that are already here. In terms of when you look at the map and some folks that reach in here, particularly in Senate districts and make part, that may be someplace where adjustments are made, because clearly there's demographic shift in terms of adding at least one, maybe 2 Senate seats somewhere back on this in the east side of the state, significant number of House seats. At what point do you consolidate those into more closer to the urban center and you stop the outreach and you make adjustments? So I think anything you can think up is likely to happen, but I also do believe, particularly in the heart of the county, I think in some ways those folks are going to have the capacity to have a bit of control over what happens locally. Because you have to think of the people trying to manage this between 165 people who care about this. If we can get 10 people in a bundle to agree to something, and that you're kind of trying to put things together like that. I think the thing that will be interesting is there's always a growing conversation about having a nonpartisan process, to have some demographically based process that's used in other states. That's not going to happen between now and the process. We've already begun that process, but that's part of the conversation. And then I will note that the last time we were responsible for doing this, the legislature couldn't do it. And a district court judge sat down and did it and announced at 10 o'clock on Thursday night, people's districts that they had to file for by Monday morning. And that's kind of the nature of how that works. At some point, we've got a divided government with a Democratic governor and a Republican-controlled legislature. They're going to have to come to some kind of agreement. And if they cannot pass something, then the court very likely it would land. I'm not saying that's how it's going to happen. I'm always of good faith, assuming we're going to come to some kind of agreement. But that's what happened the last time because we couldn't get it work. And that's even when, but I'll leave that there. Yeah. It's a long answer. I don't have a clear one, but it's messy. It's there all the time. But I think particularly here, other than maybe some of those Senate districts, there may not be tremendous change.
Great. Well, thank you, Stuart. We appreciate it. We will move on to appointments. And I believe we do have 2 appointments.
And I think we may have a third, but if you want to start with the Senior Resource Center appointments.
Okay. So this is Commissioner Portillo, and I move the following appointments to the Douglas County Senior Resource Center Board of Directors, Mickey Dick, for a first 3-year term to expire December 31st, 2024, filling the expiring position of Ernesto Hodison, and Ed Schulte to fill a partial term to expire December 31st, 2023.
Second.
All of those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
And
Sarah, you mentioned we may have a
Reed,
Yep, this is Commissioner Reed. Grant Township is in need of a treasurer, and because of somebody who moved out of that township, and luckily a relatively new Douglas County resident, or a relatively new resident to Grant Township, stepped up, Louise Graham, and she's got time to serve out the rest of that open seat, and expects to probably be interested in continuing to serve. So I move to appoint Louise Graham as Grant Township Treasurer.
Second.
all of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
thank you. I did hear from Megan that there's a couple other openings on Senior Resource Center Board coming up later this year, at the year end. So if you've got ideas of folks, I'm sure that group will be interested in trying to get some of those names. That's, I think, all we have for appointments.
Let's move right along to miscellaneous. What do you have for us, Sarah?
Commissioners, you have a pretty full memo in there with a lot of attachments. I did want to just let Jill have an opportunity to speak about the memo that she wrote related to the continuum of care position that we originally put in the 2022 budget through Bert Nash, and some changes that have come about that, and how we'd like to start it early. So Jill, if you could just quickly walk the commissioners through that.
Commissioners, when we first talked about the need for a regional coordinator position, as Sarah said, it came up as a request that was submitted by Bert Nash Community Mental Health Center, which historically has filled the role of the regional coordinator position in a volunteer capacity. In addition, in the candidacy of David Tucker, who did that in addition to his duties as his full-time duties as a case manager and a leader of the homeless outreach team. The need for a permanent or a full-time regional coordinator dedicated to the work of coordinating the activities of the regional COC efforts, the continuum of care, chiefly the coordinated entry system and the by name list and all the things that come along with that. One of the learnings that has come out of our Built for Zero initiative has been that this is a full-time job because of the sheer numbers and the lack of capacity in our institutions to respond accordingly. Some of those factors include things like the fact that Douglas County sits within a balance of state continuum of care, which is serving a good chunk of the rest of this state, which is dealing with a diversity of stakeholders and even less resources and capacity in organizations that are able to serve folks experiencing or at risk of homelessness. Douglas County puts a ton of pressure on that system because of the numbers of folks that are experiencing homelessness in Douglas County. And the need for this coordinator position was really apparent and shared amongst all of our local partners. the opportunity to seize the moment of working with the candidate that we've initiated a contract with. David Tucker came about when David left his position on very good standing with Bert Nash and had the opportunity to enter into a contractual agreement with Douglas County to help us start this roll up and help us get a strong footing with it based on his track record, ability to already have a strong rapport and collaborative activity track record with the local continuum of care. And there's shared agreement within the local COC framework that David would be an excellent person to be the first person in this role and perform these duties. While the position funding from Douglas County did not start until the beginning, till January 1 of 2022, the need to fill this role no one was in a position to fill this role once David resigned his position at Bert Nash. And so we were able to work with the city of Lawrence to get some one-time funds that was left over from a city ESG COVID grant to fund this position starting November 1 through the end of December. So that was a really great team effort with the city of Lawrence, and I'm super grateful for them for making that happen. But David's going to get in and he's going to be working directly with our Built for Zero initiative, providing full-time support to advancing the work of that project. The biggest thing is still being completing our by name list and having quality data that works in tandem with the work of coordinating the biweekly COC coordinated entry meetings and working with our providers that need to have access on a day-to-day basis to the HMIS system, need help with the assessments, the VI SPDATs, need training on the VI SPDATs, and providing an extra layer of capacity to the Kansas Statewide Homeless Coalition, which is that balance of state infrastructure. So he's going to be working on chiefly providing that support to the COC and also providing some full-time firepower on our Built for Zero initiative, which after we get the by name list tackled and getting all the data finally in order, he's going to be working closely with our partner agencies on implementing our new outreach policy, which is also core to the Built for Zero initiative. We've had a lot of progress in the Built for Zero initiative space on getting some shared understanding of what we're trying to accomplish, but there really is a need for somebody that has the experience and the subject matter expertise and the relationship with the different organizations to get in and facilitate this work to get us closer to our goal of ending chronic homelessness by 2023. I think that, and one of the outcomes of David's work is also going to be just to help us really understand what is the role of this position on an ongoing basis, and how is it going to function, because it's a brand new position for us. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities to learn what does this position look like and do on a permanent ongoing basis. That I hope we can bring him to the commission to provide some updates on his efforts. And we're going to be working on connecting him with folks that he hasn't worked with in our different county organizations as well, to make sure we're being as intentional as possible.
It's wonderful to hear that we're moving forward in this way.
We're excited.
That's all I have, commissioners.
No questions. Thanks for the thorough update, Jill.
We have nothing else. We're adjourned.